Welcome to the Female Church Leaders Podcast, a weekly resource for women who love God, love the church, and are called to lead. I'm your host, Kadi Cole, church leader, author, and executive coach. After more than 30 years in full-time ministry, often as the only woman at the table, I understand how meaningful yet challenging your calling can be. That's why I created this podcast, to remind you that you're not leading alone. Each week, I'll share practical tools, biblical insights, and honest encouragement for the real challenges female leaders face in ministry, so you can grow your skills, strengthen your faith, and lead with more confidence and joy without burning out or striving to prove yourself. We drop a new episode every Monday because Sunday is coming and you are going to be ready for it. There's a phrase in workplace research that many women hear for the first time and immediately think, oh, so that's what I've been experiencing. The phrase is invisible labor. Invisible labor refers to the work that is necessary for a team or organization to function, but often goes unnoticed, unmeasured, and unacknowledged. Things like remembering birthdays, checking in on someone who seems discouraged, making people feel included, following up with volunteers, noticing relational tension before it becomes conflict. None of these things are unimportant. In fact, they're part of what makes teams healthy. And here's where the research becomes helpful. The Women in the Workplace studies consistently show that women tend to carry a disproportionate amount of relational and emotional labor at work. Women are more likely to mentor coworkers, more likely to support struggling teammates, more likely to volunteer for culture-building tasks. Researchers sometimes call this office housework, not because it's unimportant, but because it often goes unseen and unrewarded. And if you're a woman serving in ministry, this dynamic can show up in even stronger ways, because ministry is already relational by nature. Barna research on pastors and ministry leaders consistently shows that emotional and relational demands are one of the primary contributors to ministry fatigue. When you combine that with the tendency women already have to absorb relational responsibilities, it's easy to see how invisible labor can quietly accumulate. And many women eventually find themselves asking a simple question: why am I so tired? Not because they're doing anything wrong, but because they're carrying responsibilities that were never clearly named. So today, I want to walk through 4 leadership shifts that can help us understand invisible labor and lead through it in healthier ways. Number 1, learn to recognize invisible labor. The first step is simply recognizing when invisible labor is happening. Because when something doesn't have language, it's very difficult to address. Invisible labor often looks like you're the one checking in on a discouraged volunteer. You're the one smoothing over tension between teammates. You're the one remembering important personal details about everyone. You're the one making sure people feel seen and included. Again, none of this is bad. In fact, relational awareness is one of the most valuable leadership gifts someone can have in ministry. The challenge is when one person becomes the default carrier of all relational responsibility, because that kind of leadership model quietly drains capacity. Energy that could be spent on vision, strategy, and spiritual leadership gets spent maintaining emotional equilibrium for the whole team. And over time, that becomes exhausting. Naming invisible labor doesn't mean eliminating relational care. It simply helps us see when the responsibility needs to be shared instead of silently absorbed. Because invisible labor becomes unsustainable when care is expected from one person instead of built into the culture. Another way invisible labor shows up is through anticipation. You start thinking ahead about how decisions will affect people emotionally. You notice when someone might feel overlooked. You mentally track relational dynamics in the room while everyone else is focused on the agenda. Researchers studying emotional labor describe this as relational load. It's the ongoing mental work of noticing, remembering, and responding to the emotional needs of others. Many women develop this skill early in life, and it becomes a real leadership strength. It allows you to read the room, sense the tension early, and care for people in meaningful ways. But here's the leadership insight I want you to know. When relational awareness turns into relational responsibility for everyone, the weight becomes unsustainable. Instead of being a leadership gift, it quietly becomes a leadership drain. And often the people around you don't even realize it's happening because you're so good at carrying it. That's why learning to recognize invisible labor is actually a leadership skill. Not so we stop caring about people, but so we can lead in a way that protects both our capacity and the health of the whole ministry. Number 2, discern which invisible work should continue. This is where the conversation often gets more nuanced, because some invisible labor is actually beautiful ministry work. Checking in on someone who is struggling, encouraging a discouraged volunteer, celebrating a team member's milestone. These things create a healthy ministry culture. So the goal is not to eliminate relational care. The goal is to be intentional about how it happens. Sometimes the right response is simply acknowledging the work and continuing to do it. But sometimes the right response is beginning to raise the conversation with your leaders, because ministry environments are actually some of the most open places to talk about healthy culture. Churches care about people. Churches value spiritual and emotional health, and many leaders are grateful when someone helps them see a dynamic they didn't realize was happening. So sometimes the leadership step isn't stopping the work. It's saying something like, I've noticed there are several relational responsibilities happening behind the scenes that are really important for our culture. Could we think together about how we structure those so they're shared across the team? That kind of conversation doesn't create conflict. It builds awareness. Number 3, resist the pressure to carry it for everyone. There's another dynamic that shows up in ministry teams, especially when someone is the only female leader on staff or at their level. Many women begin to feel responsible for mentoring all the younger women, advocating for every woman on the team, helping every female volunteer process leadership challenges. And while mentoring and championing other women is wonderful, something subtle can happen. The responsibility quietly becomes too big for one or just a few people to carry. And even more interesting, sometimes this dynamic unintentionally limits the development of the broader leadership team. Because when one woman becomes the default mentor for every other woman on staff, male leaders may never stretch into the responsibility of developing female leaders themselves, which means the culture never actually changes. Sometimes the healthiest leadership move is realizing supporting other women is important, but it's not a burden one person can carry alone. Healthy cultures develop when the entire leadership team participates in developing everyone. Men mentoring women, women mentoring men, leaders investing in people across the whole team. When that happens, leadership development becomes a shared responsibility instead of a silent burden. And number 4, shift from carrying culture to building culture. This is where leadership growth can really kick in. There's a big difference between personally carrying relational culture and building systems that support relational care for people. For example, instead of personally remembering every birthday, you build a system where the team celebrates birthdays together. Instead of personally checking in on every volunteer, small group leaders or team captains help carry that responsibility. Instead of resolving every relational tension yourself, you train team leaders in healthy conflict conversations so they can navigate their own issues. When leaders shift from doing relational work to multiplying relational leadership, the culture actually becomes healthier and stronger. This is one of the quiet shifts that happens as leaders grow. Early in leadership, we often personally carry many aspects of the culture we want to see. We check on everyone, we encourage people, we smooth relational tension, but mature leadership begins asking a different question. How do I help our team become the kind of community where everyone does this together? Because healthy ministry cultures aren't built one relationally gifted leader at a time. They're built on shared ownership of care. That might look like training team leaders to check in on volunteers, building rhythms where appreciation is part of the meetings, encouraging peer-to-peer encouragement instead of everything flowing through one person. And something beautiful happens when this shift takes place. Instead of you being the engine that keeps the relational culture alive, the culture itself begins sustaining the team. Healthy ministry cultures don't depend on one caring leader. They multiply leaders who care. When that happens, people start caring for each other. Encouragement spreads more naturally, and the ministry becomes healthier and more resilient. That is not stepping back from leadership. That's actually multiplying it. And the emotional weight of leadership becomes healthier and more manageable for you and for everyone else. We aren't stepping away from people. We're equipping people to care for others well, too, which is exactly what Ephesians 4 describes when it says leaders are called to equip the saints for the work of ministry. Healthy ministry is never built on one person carrying all the relational labor. It's built on teams who share it, and that's how Jesus designed his body to work best. Paul actually acknowledges this leadership tension in Galatians 6:2 when he writes, "Carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ." That verse is often quoted in ministry settings, and rightly so. We are called to care for one another. But just 3 verses later in Galatians 6:5, Paul also says, each one should carry their own load. So which is it? Both. Healthy Christian communities share burdens, but healthy leadership also recognizes that not every responsibility belongs on one person's shoulders. Invisible labor becomes exhausting when one leader ends up carrying what was meant to be shared by the whole body, or sometimes even worked through by the person themselves as they grow. The goal, again, isn't less care. The goal is healthy care shared by the community, where people support one another and also grow in carrying the responsibilities God has given them. That's how the church was designed to function. One of the most encouraging things about understanding invisible labor is realizing that nothing about your leadership strength needs to be lost. Your relational awareness is still valuable. Your care for people still matters. Your ability to notice emotional dynamics is an amazing gift. The shift is simply learning how to carry that gift wisely instead of endlessly. Because healthy leadership doesn't mean caring less about people. It means building a culture where more people care well together. And that kind of leadership creates ministry that lasts. So here's your action step for this week. Write down 3 responsibilities you regularly carry that are rarely acknowledged. Then ask yourself these 3 questions. First, is this something I should continue doing because it genuinely strengthens my leadership or our ministry culture? Second, is this something that would actually be healthier if I were to share with others on the team? And third, if I do choose to keep carrying it, how can I talk with my leader about the extra load I'm taking on so they understand what's happening behind the scenes and can affirm my contribution? Sometimes the most important step isn't changing everything right away. Sometimes it simply starts with naming what's been invisible. Because once invisible labor is acknowledged, leaders can begin making healthier decisions for themselves and for the entire ministry. If this episode helped you put language to something you've been experiencing, would you take a moment to rate the podcast? It helps more female church leaders find these important conversations. We see the care, the leadership, and the faithfulness you carry, even the parts that sometimes go unnoticed. And we want you to know it truly makes a difference. And we are here to cheer you on every step of the way. I'm so glad we got to spend this time together on the Female Church Leaders Podcast. I hope you're walking away encouraged, equipped, and reminded that your calling truly matters. To keep growing, join us for our next Closing the Leadership Gap cohort at closingtheleadershipgap.com. It's a guided coaching experience, including live Q&A with me, designed to accelerate your leadership journey. If this podcast has been helpful to you, would you please take a moment to follow, rate, and share it? Your engagement helps the algorithms suggest our resources to female church leaders we haven't had a chance to meet yet. And don't forget to follow at Female Church Leaders on Instagram for encouragement and leadership tools designed just for you. You can also follow my personal feed at Kadi Cole, spelled Kadicole. Keep leading faithfully, keep growing your leadership gifts, and I'll see you next Monday because Sunday is coming and you are going to be ready for it.